Hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about Link and what we might make of this relative strength it's showing versus the rest of the market. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates, better indicators, and more over there. So Link has been doing something kind of interesting over the past, several days, ever since really the beginning of this month of September. You can see that Link has actually been in a notable local uptrend throughout this whole time. And the reason why I think this is interesting is if we just compare to what other, the other kind of bigger players in the crypto space are doing right now, they're struggling a lot more. You look at Bitcoin and it's kind of relatively flat throughout that same period. And then you look at Ethereum and it's also actually down versus where it was at the beginning of the month. And then to say nothing of the stock market, so here I'm showing the S&P 500, you can see that has, kind of round tripped now down over that period. NASDAQ, same story also with the Dow Jones. But yeah, here's Link seeming to in some ways defy gravity and continue to move up, even with these pretty big red candle days kind of mixed in. So I want to talk a little bit about what we might make of this. And I want to look at some of our indicators here at the channel to kind of start off that conversation. So one of the things that's really interesting about this behavior with Link is that an interesting pattern is starting to emerge on the momentum bias indicator. So if you're not familiar with this indicator, it's one that captures momentum in the market. So basically 0 is this kind of neutral line. So red would be this negative momentum bias. That's when price is kind of being pulled to the downside. And then green is a positive momentum bias. And this tends to be what will characterize bull markets, kind of pulls price up. And so with bear markets, like we've been in more recently, really ever since, Link's all-time high back in the spring of 21, it's been in basically a downtrend ever since. Had a decent bounce coming off of the summer, local lows, but, really wasn't able to set in a new all-time high. Really can see this as being one kind of big downtrend, and especially since this period here. And so if you look at the NBI, it shows up very clearly, right? Look at how much time we're spending in the red, and every time we're getting above 0, we're just getting rejected to the downside to, greater and greater extent. So you can actually see this massive kind of downtrend on the NBI, even starting all the way back here in the summer of 2020, that even the all-time high was not able to get a greater momentum bias, which actually would have been, during this time, a bearish sign. And then here we go, leading into this big downtrend in the NBI. Now, what's interesting more recently is that we actually got this big spike above 0 to actually break that downtrend. And not only that, we've actually gone back and re-popped ourselves above 0, poked our heads back above 0 again. And the reason why this is interesting and why I think this is notable is that one of the things that you see with assets, basically every asset I've looked at the NBI for, Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. What the NBI does is that when you're kind of in this transitionary period between bear markets and bull markets, what you get is this moment where you start doing this kind of equal oscillation around 0. You're kind of spending a lot of time in the red, and you start kind of spending more time just kind of oscillating around 0 or like this before then you can see some moves to the upside. And this is something that I've been talking about for a while, is I've been waiting to start to see this on the NBI, not just for Link, but for other assets, frankly. Because what you don't want to see is this kind of behavior where every time you put your head above 0, you're just going to immediately reject it down to the deep red, and then oftentimes price will go in and set a new low. Now, it's important to note that, Link is starting to show this behavior, and there's a couple other assets that are as well. Atom, for example, which has been showing a lot of relative strength as well. But other assets aren't, like Bitcoin, for example, Ethereum haven't really started to show this as definitively. And so that's one place where, I think it's unlikely for this to mean that Link will go on some big bull run without the rest of the market. I think the rest of the market needs to turn more bullish before Link can do that. But it's also possible that Link is going to be one of the first kind of heralds of a change in the tide. And what we're seeing right now is certainly a suggestion that this kind of down-only price action that we've seen might, and I say might, be starting to break. That the kind of the environment we're in might be starting to shift. Because again, we're seeing this reemergence above 0 off of a much shallower delve down into the negative momentum bias territory than was typical in the past. And we poked our heads back up. And especially if we see Link continue to move up here and this continue to move up here more, that would just make me more and more confident or make it more and more plausible that this might be a change in the trend, that we might be getting to a new stage. The down-only bear market might be running out of steam. So this is something that I think is going to be really interesting to watch. So the MBI is an indicator we have here at the channel. I'll be giving updates as this develops. But I wanted to call this out first. I think this is a really interesting data point, and it might be a sign of a change in the tide, potentially. Now, another indicator we can look at that can give us some other useful information is the upside downside potential indicator, or UDPI. So this is our risk indicator. So what I've done here is I've taken the price history of Link across time. It's color-coded to the UDPI output. So getting up towards 5 is high risk. That's when the upside potential has been exhausted. And then down towards -5, that's low risk. That's when the downside potential has been exhausted from the model's estimation, and upside is more, plausible from that point. And so we can see, and if I switch over just the raw output of the model, we can see this a bit more clearly, is that, the UDPI, the long terms, this is a version of the model that cares about moves that play out over months to multiple months, so more macro in its focus. You can see we got all the way down to basically -5, basically the bottom of the range here for the UDPI, which really had only happened one time before, back here in late 2018. And again, that was very much close to the bottom, or really the only times we've been below -4 was at the absolute bottom for Link, and then this kind of next almost same level, and here we are again now at the UDPI at that same kind of low level there. And so what's notable about that is that if this would be a bottoming point, this would coincide with what we're seeing on the MBI, right? That if this really was the bottom, and again, I'm not saying that it is the bottom, I don't know, and I've talked before about how trying to call the bottom is a bit of a fool's errand. But if it ends up being the bottom, it would be very reasonable to think that that's the case, because, we've seen the UDPI acting the same way as acted at previous bottoms. And generally speaking, with different assets, when you get to these really low risk levels, so for example with Bitcoin, when Bitcoin gets below -4, historically speaking, you're oftentimes close to the end of the bear market. It might not be the absolute end, but it's close to the end of the bear market. There's another data point that might suggest that a turn of the tide would not be unheard of, or would not be ridiculous to think is possible coming from this level. Now, of course, this is crypto. Anything can happen. If the stock market falls off a cliff, that might not save Link from falling further. We're just gonna have to wait and see. But certainly, the data suggests that everything that it knows about Link from its past would suggest that this is a logical place for a low to form, or for a bottom to potentially form. And we can see this if we look at other kind of versions of the UDPI as well. So I should note also the raw level of the long-term UDPI is elevated from where it was here. And so that's one thing that might be a potential concern. Being at -2 is that certainly there's more upside than downside potential the model sees as being realistic. But what it does mean is that the model might be pricing in the possibility of further downside if that's what ends up happening. That the model says we've been kind of stuck in this range for a while, and that there is a possibility for a break to the downside, so it's pricing in the possibility of that, saying that there's some, the floor is moving further down from where it was back here, is one way that can be interpreted. And so similar, the model tells a similar story when we look at the medium-term UDPI. This cares about moves that play out over weeks to months, so it's shorter in its time preference. Again, the same kind of idea. We had this point below -4, which again only got to once before at this very low point in Link's past. Got there again back here. And now we come down a bit more, and we're currently sitting a little bit below -2. So again, a lot more upside than downside potential the model sees as being plausible in the kind of the medium term in the coming weeks to months. But it is building in the possibility as well of additional downside. So the short-term UDPI also tells a similar story. Now it's a bit more overextended than the other two, being just up a bit below -1. But it's still the same kind of idea. There's more realistic upside potential in the near term, so days to weeks, than downside. But there is the possibility of that downside, right? We are more overextended here than we were over here, is the model's estimation. And again, the way I would interpret that is that the model is building in a lower potential floor, or the possibility of more downside to come. So generally speaking, these models would all suggest that a positive risk reward here is more of their base case, right? That's kind of what these models are saying. And again, if we are getting to this kind of turn the tide type moment, that could mean that some further upside could be reasonable from here, maybe even getting us back up into these positive UDPI territory, which we really haven't seen for quite a while. We have to go all the way back here before we see on the short-term UDPI, for example, a positive reading. And then for the other ones, you have to go even further back before you start seeing us being that extended. So then if we're looking at Link, the last thing I wanted to talk about as well then is that if this is actually a potential change in the tide, and if we are going to see some kind of upside potentially, now again, I want to caveat that to say that I think that's only probably going to happen in the near term. If we don't see the stock market just fall off a complete cliff and Bitcoin go along with it, I think then kind of the gravity of the market will kind of swoop in and probably stop Link from doing anything too impressive. But if that doesn't happen, if broader market conditions allow, and we do see this kind of uptrend we're starting to form continue, where might we expect things to go? I mean, just from a pure kind of technical perspective within this range, we might say that, well, we're probably going to see resistance again at about $9.50, because that's acted as resistance twice already. Every time we've gotten up to there from in this range, we've been rejected off of it. One possibility. The other thing I wanted to talk about though is if we just go back and just kind of look at price action from generally kind of more or less the beginning of last year through now, and we look at the volume profile. So this just shows at what level or what price levels, how much volume transacted at that level. So how much volume has transacted as just a proportion of whatever we're seeing here, this visual range. And we can see is, a lot of volume is transacted down here at these lows, especially down through here when we're closer to the kind of actual lows of this range. We had a lot of volume for Link down there, which contributes to this big bar here. You'll notice that as we get up, if we can clear above this kind of resistance range at the $9.50 kind of general area, there's very little volume that transacted between around $9 and $9.30 and about $13 before you start hitting this next level. And the reason why this kind of view is useful is I can give us an idea of where people's cost bases might sit, right? If a lot of volume transacted up here, there might still be a decent number of people who decide to hold on to those coins that they bought up here. And so if price gets back up to their cost basis, they might decide, all right, I'm getting out. I've held to this loss that was painful. Now I'm seeing a possibility to recoup my, investment. I'm just going to get out at break even. And so that can act as resistance. But the good news for Link is that if, we have to go all the way to 13 cents before we get there, assuming we break out of this range, then, that's kind of putting us at a move of about, 75% to the upside just at the bottom of that range. And if we were to go further, we could be talking, up into the 140, 150% rally from current levels. So that's just something that I'm going to be looking for if we see, broader markets allow for another rally. And again, I don't think that Link is going to be able to do that if the rest of the market is tanking or acting especially bearish. But if we do see a more bullish sentiment, one of the things that I'm kind of looking at with Link is because it's been showing all this relative strength, that can sometimes mean that it's more likely to be one of the ones that performs really well in the next kind of positive sentiment moment. So obviously, short-term speculation is always a bit questionable. None of this is financial advice. You should make your own opinion. But this is just some things that I'm thinking about with Link right now. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like and follow us on Twitter. A lot of updates, Twitter indicators, and more over there.